Inside the second story of the Lorraine Motel, just after 6 in the evening on April 4th, 1968, close associate and friend Ralph Abernathy heard gunfire. He ran outside to the balcony and found civil rights activist Martin Luther King Jr. slain by the alleged gunfire of James Earl Ray. A single shot from Ray's Remington rifle from across the street had brought an end to the life of America's, if not the world's, most important civil rights leader. According to the FBI report which concluded the official narrative, James Earl Ray was, quote, a lone, racially motivated assassin, with J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI having stated in June of that year that, quote, I said I think Ray is a racist and detested Negroes and Martin Luther King. However, it is this very man, J. Edgar Hoover, who causes conspiracy theories to remain vehement to this very day, that the FBI killed that Atlanta-born pastor, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. But what is the evidence? Since 1962, the Federal Bureau of Investigations held Dr. King in passionate contempt for his Marxist-Leninist line, with J. Edgar Hoover telling Robert F. Kennedy that year of King's supposed secret membership within the Communist Party. This in turn led to Robert F. Kennedy approving wiretaps of Dr. King in the following year of 1963, beginning a long-lasting paranoid surveillance campaign as well as harassment targeting Dr. King by the FBI's counterintelligence program known as COINTELPRO. And this was not just a political move by the FBI, as Hoover held personal disdain for the civil rights leader. Hoover said King had degenerate sexual urges, and this contempt was echoed by the rest of his agency. Documents describe Dr. King's conferences as being littered with, quote, behind-the-scene drinking, fornication, and homosexuality, even going as far as to mail alleged sex tapes to King in an attempt to blackmail him, supposedly into either committing suicide or resigning himself from political life. This blackmail was sent with an accompanying letter describing him as sexually psychotic. Hoover's hatred for Dr. King was a powerful obscurer of the truth, as COINTELPRO's conclusion that King had no communist affiliations after years of surveillance were not enough in the way of satisfying Hoover's malicious curiosity. Instead, Hoover insisted upon his continued surveillance all the way up until his untimely death on that evening in April of 1968, as evidenced by later declassified files from the 1976 Church Committee. However, the FBI's motivations under Director Hoover go beyond personal hate for King, as there is evidence to suggest that Hoover was opposed to the broader civil rights movement, and thus was politically convicted in undermining King. The Ku Klux Klan bombing in 1963 of 16th Street Baptist Church had suspects facing evidence which was reportedly, quote, so strong, according to Hal Raines of the New York Times, that even an all-white Alabama jury would have convicted. However, Hoover ordered the FBI's inquiry into that matter to cease, leading to no justice ever being delivered. Additionally, Hoover claimed that the Black Panthers were the greatest threat to the internal security of the country. Ultimately, Hoover's FBI surveillance of King was an investigation lowered upon genuine fear and political animosity towards the movement he represented, as well as deep, deep personal hatred. Considering Martin Luther King's status in American politics at his height in the late 1960s as a monolithic figure of American culture and politics, there is certainly charity to give to the idea that the FBI genuinely feared a civil rights anti-Vietnam War figure in the executive office of the United States of America. Multiple anti-Vietnam War Democrats, including Allard K. Lowenstein, attempted to persuade King to run against President Johnson in the 1968 presidential election, a possibility which King reportedly contemplated, albeit inevitably decided against. Although he decided against running for the presidency, this was not public knowledge, although rumors of him supposedly contemplating to run for president certainly were public knowledge, and were thus known to the FBI. Ultimately, J. Edgar Hoover's FBI was motivated on all levels of ideological positions and personal investments to take out King. The official narrative of the United States government, which continues today, was established in 1979 by the 95th Congress's Subcommittee on the Assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., which concluded that, quote, no U.S. government agency was part of the King conspiracy. Instead, they determined that there was a likelihood that Martin Luther King's demise was brought about only by a conspiracy between James L. Ray and his brothers. Each member of the subcommittee came to this unanimous conclusion. However, I do have questions. Samuel L. Devine, one of the subcommittee members, was a special agent of the FBI in the 1940s, and later became chairman of the Ohio Un-American Activities Committee in the 1950s, responsible for declaring that approximately 1,300 Ohioans were members of the Communist Party. At Devine's request, the Ohioan government passed legislation in order to fine and imprison communist Americans. As such, his hatred and paranoia for communists, like supposedly Dr. King, was a defining feature of his political career. Unfortunately, Samuel Devine is perhaps the least documented member of the subcommittee on the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., and as such there is no evidence other than mere speculation for Devine's feelings towards Dr. King. However, given the context that Devine had a career in the FBI and was a hardline anti-communist in Congress in a time when the FBI suspected MLK was a communist or communist sympathizer, we can deduce that he was likely not an impartial and unbiased member of the subcommittee, and likely diluted the official narrative. Members of the King family, including Coretta, Dexter, MLK III, amidst others, believed that there was a government conspiracy which had led to their father's death. Initially, Ray had entered a guilty plea after being extradited to Tennessee for trial, which his attorney Percy Foreman allegedly pressured him into in order to avoid the sentence of death by electrocution. It is now believed that it was unbeknownst to Ray that a death sentence would have been unconstitutional in the state of Tennessee, and as such, Ray dismissed Foreman as his attorney. As such, from March 13, 1969 onwards, Ray's official position till death in 1998 was that he did not personally shoot Dr. King, but may have been partially responsible without knowing it. Ray's next attorney, Jack Kershaw, petitioned the government to conduct ballistics tests in order to prove that Ray was not responsible for firing the fatal shot, insisting instead that it was a blonde Cuban named Raul. Yet ultimately the ballistics tests proved inconclusive for either narrative. Ultimately, the evidence which is used to suggest Ray's motivation behind killing Dr. King is that, according to his friends and family, he was an outspoken racist who spoke of his intentions to kill King. This is supposedly in combination with the fact that he desired the notoriety of having killed King. As Ray told journalist William Bradford Huey that he purposely left the rifle with his fingerprints on it in plain sight at the crime scene because he wanted to become a famous criminal. To the first part of the supposed evidence, alleging that he was an outspoken racist, the best evidence we have for this is that he supposedly endorsed George Wallace running for president, which certainly constitutes the makings of a racist given Wallace's segregationist policies. However, there are no signed statements, audio recordings, admissible confessions, testimonies, or any other valid form of primary source which can evidence the claim that Ray ever once spoke of intending to kill King. William Francis Pepper, who was a contact of Martin Luther King from 1967 onwards in anti-Vietnam War circles, became Ray's last attorney towards his death, and has stipulated that Ray was framed by the FBI. The core tenet of his argument was that because Ray never stood trial due to having instantly pled guilty under the assumed threat of the death sentence, he should in fact have a free and fair trial. Going back to the fateful events themselves, as pictured here is the alleged trajectory of the bullet that James L. Ray fired, fatally striking Dr. King, according to the FBI. While what I am about to say may be conjecture, there is evidence to say that Ray was not a capable marksman, let alone of the one-and-done variety. Firstly, he was entirely unfamiliar with rifles, as evidenced by the fact that he bought the wrong gun. According to testimony from Era Marine Supply Company employees in Birmingham, Alabama, where Ray bought the gun, Ray, on the 29th of March 1968, bought a Remington .243 caliber rifle, but then returned the next day on the 30th of March and exchanged it for a Remington Game Master .30-06 caliber rifle. Ray's reasoning for this was that he was following instructions from the aforementioned Raoul in order to get the correct gun, as he had first made a mistake. Ray suggested that he believed Raoul was an underground gun runner connected to some lucrative opportunities, and had been following him since meeting in Montreal in 1967, where he first was promised work, and as such was merely going along with Raoul's requests. To conclude on Ray's version of events on that fateful day, he and Raoul had allegedly rented a room as per Raoul's choice, and when the shooting occurred just after 6 o'clock, he was near his car a few blocks away, not in the room from where the shot was fired. Ultimately, to conclude on this, although it is very unfortunate, given the time that has passed, it is likely that there will never be a definitive conclusion on the death of one of the world's greatest civil rights leaders. Evidence has eroded with the passing of time, as has the pool of people to seek testimony from. However, I am inclined to believe that the reigning consensus of the King family to this day, that there was a conspiracy by the United States government, likely by virtue of the Federal Bureau of Investigations, to assassinate Martin Luther King, is true. There were no witnesses as to James Earl Ray being at the scene of the crime at the time it occurred. There was very little, if any, motivation for his alleged actions. There was no due process or fair trial to indict him, just a coerced confession. On the other hand, the FBI themselves had the personal motivations of J. Edgar Hoover, had the strategic political motivations of the overall federal government, and had the ideological motivations of anti-communism to take him out. In a final analysis, it is likely that the FBI killed Martin Luther King.